rotations, peeling, kiting. There's a lot of terms that get used in the Overwatch community that are quite complicated and not everyone knows what they mean. Well, in this series, the Overwatch Dictionary, I'm going to break down all these terms episode by episode so that you can know what the hell is going on in your games. In this episode, we're going to talk tactical terms, so we're going to look at all kinds of strategic maneuvers you may hear people refer to in your games or you might want to know about yourself. So whether you're a long-time veteran or a first-time player, make sure you're on the same page about understanding these important Overwatch terms. Now we're going to start with a couple terms that many consider rather complicated, but are actually quite straightforward once you understand them. Pathing and rotations. And yes, unlike a real dictionary, this won't be alphabetical, sorry. So delete that YouTube comment, I know you were typing. Pathing simply refers to the path or route that you take in Overwatch to get from one place to the other. And this can be as an individual or as a team. The reason that pathing is important is that there are some routes which are way safer than others for going where you want to go. Let's take a look at an example of what I mean. Take Eichenwald Point B for example. This is a map where defenders will often sit atop the castle high ground. The payload meanwhile needs to be pushed via an exposed low ground area. So sure, technically you have to walk the payload all the way along the low ground, but often if that's all you do, you'll find that your team gets destroyed from the high ground and dies before they make any real progress. So a better path to take is to go through the castle, which is protected and provides you cover from the people on the high ground. Then go up to the high ground yourself and contest the enemy defenders there. Once you deal with them, then it will be way easier to push the payload afterwards. This is why high ground is such an important concept in Overwatch as well, and why it's of the utmost importance that you stop enemy players from sitting on the high ground uncontested. High ground allows you not only better angles, but also allows you to shoot down on opponents and duck out of their line of sight when you want to, while they are forced to shoot at you from a worse angle and have much less cover to run to when they want. So pathing, like I said, is the route you take to get to where you want to go. But it also relates to the term rotations. Rotations are when a team makes a concerted effort to reposition, usually based off how the enemy team is pathing. So, in that Eichenwald example, if you're on the high ground and you see the enemy team pathing their way up the castle, you can then rotate accordingly to take a position that still keeps some distance between the two of you, allowing you to fire back more safely. Particularly as defenders, it's important to make rotations so that you're not caught off guard by an enemy team approaching you from an angle that's different to just running it down mid. Hopefully you're still following along because I'm about to add just one more term here to really round off this point. Because something to consider when you're talking about pathing and rotations is sightlines. One of the most obvious reasons to need better pathing is to avoid dangerous sightlines that an enemy might have. Let's take for example Watch Point Gibraltar. You'll often find Widowmakers set up on this little perch here on point A. If you come from an obvious angle within her sightlines, that meaning an angle that she can see directly which isn't blocked by cover, then you're running the risk that she just shoots you down for free. However, this is where good pathing can be key. If you come from this room here, which is protected and covered, you can avoid all the dangerous sightlines all the way until you're ready to get right on top of that pesky sniper that is destroying you. If an enemy has the range advantage, you want to make sure you avoid their sidelines until you can use cooldowns that cover that distance for you. So to summarize, pathing is how you approach a point in Overwatch and is important so that you can avoid unnecessary damage and avoid dangerous enemy sightlines. If your opponent is pathing towards you though, you may want to make a rotation that sees you avoid that danger altogether. Okay, so those were a lot of terms flying your way off the bat. So let's simplify to one of the easiest terms in Overwatch. Grouping up. Now when you hear your teammates say group up, they may well be referring to my weekly podcast discussing Overwatch with notable figures from the community on a wide range of topics, which now will only be uploaded to its own separate channel which you can find in the video description. But what's more likely is that they are asking for your team to gather together and fight simultaneously. One of the easiest mistakes to make in Overwatch is to fight one by one and well, die one by one. This is known as trickling because of how players trickle down one by one like water droplets on a window. Overwatch is most definitely a team game, so if you play without yours, you're almost certain to lose. If you group up and fight together, you have a much higher chance of winning any engagement. Another fundamental team-based principle is what we call ultimate economy. Everything in Overwatch can be considered a resource. Your health, your cooldown, your bullets, anything that's finite really. And perhaps the strongest resource anyone has is their ultimate. Ultimate economy is simply a way of referring to how efficient you are with that resource of ultimates. If you use all your ultimates at once, you'll win one fight, sure. But what happens in the next fight? Well, if the enemy team has a lot of their ultimates left, you're gonna lose. And this can be a particularly important concept for defenders of a point, because if they lose even one fight, they can often lose the entire point. This is why it's important to space out your ultimates and only use as many as are necessary to win one fight. But as an attacker, you can exploit this concept to do what's called baiting, where you use one or no ultimates with a specific intention of making the enemy team ruin their ultimate economy by blowing a bunch of their ultimates on a fight you never intended to win in the first place. Once all their ultimates are out, you're free to use yours and win the next fight for free, preferably while not ruining your own ultimate economy and spacing yours out in a way that allows you to win multiple subsequent fights. Speaking of ultimates, one common mistake people often make in Overwatch is to fight even when the enemy team is using ultimates or committing everything they have into a short-term attack. This is where you can do what is called kiting. Kiting is a really old term in gaming and refers to basically keeping your enemy at a distance while you either disengage or fire from a safe gap. It originates from the idea of flying a kite, where you can imagine leading the enemy along as if they were tied to the end of your kite. In Overwatch, kiting is synonymous with disengaging, that being to step away from a fight for a little bit. Let's look at an example. In this situation here, the red team has popped Lucio's sound barrier ultimate and are aggressing towards the blue team. If the blue team were to fight here, they would almost certainly lose because the red team has a bunch of free health right now that is meaningless to hit. Instead, they can kite and run away from this engagement until the sound barrier wears off. Then they can engage with their own sound barrier and now fight at an advantage, making it an easy win for them. Whenever possible in Overwatch, you want to take fights when it is in your advantage and not the enemy's. Now, we've spoken a bit about situations where you want to operate all together, but there are times when actually splitting off is the right play. One such example is called flanking. While it's generally good to fight together, if you all run down the same path, it can often be easy for enemies to fire in one narrow area and gun you all down. This is particularly true on areas that are very choke point heavy. FYI, a choke point simply refers to a narrow path that one team has to walk through to get to where they want to go. So if your team is struggling to navigate through a certain area, flanking might be very effective as a tool. To flank, you simply take an alternate path that is usually either a bit out the way or perhaps more unexpected or hidden than the normal route. This way, you can catch enemies by surprise and get a quick kill that unlocks everything for your team. Another occasion to operate on your own is what's called backcapping. You may have encountered situations where the enemy team is holding a really strong spot on the map and just punishing your team before you can even get to the objective you're supposed to capture or push. You know all about rotations, but you can't seem to get your team to try it for the life of them, literally. Sometimes during moments like this, an opportunity opens up to backcap. Backcapping is when you sneak over to the objective and start taking it by yourself, preferably unknown to the enemy team. Sometimes this will work amazingly and just capture the point for you by itself. We're doing it, we're doing it, we're doing it, we're doing it! This is often called C9ing in the Overwatch community, but that is a term along with many others that I will define in a future episode of this series, which will look at more slang community terms. However, backcapping itself can just simply have the benefit of making the enemy team have to react to you and give up the stubborn ground they were holding, thus opening up the opportunity for your team to finally break through. By the way, if you're enjoying this content, then why not consider joining me for my live streams on Twitch, where I stream 5 days a week and give live tips like this all the time. Or if you're not someone who enjoys watching Twitch, why not subscribe to my other YouTube channel, the SVB Side, where I put up the highlights of all the best content from my stream, such as VOD reviews, gameplay, and also fun events that I do with other streamers, such as the Rank Gauntlet, which is an Overwatch game show where popular creators compete for high scores by putting handicaps on themselves while they play in custom lobbies filled with volunteers like yourself of all ranks ranging from Bronze to Grandmaster. Please do consider giving it a watch, as the link is in the video description, and see if you like it. Back to the dictionary though, let's talk about our next term, peeling. And no, this has nothing to do with bananas. Peeling is simply the term to refer to when you drop back to help the weaker characters on your team survive a potential engagement. Generally, it's something you would do for a character who doesn't have too much utility to escape for themselves. Often flankers in particular will target your supports or your backline. So if you can peel for them, that is to turn around and run back to protect them, you can not only keep your teammates alive, but usually get a free kill or two for yourself, because the opponent will have committed a lot of resources to their attack and will have nothing left to run away. It can be tricky understanding when to peel and when to push forwards, but with time, this is a balance that great players learn to make. Next up, let's discuss stalling. The name gives you a hint here, but stalling refers to buying time, particularly with regards to the objective in a game. Objectives work interestingly in Overwatch in that things like capture points and payloads can be contested by just one player. So even if all 5 of the enemy team is on an objective, even having just one of your team on it will block the objective. This is particularly effective on control maps, aka King of the Hill, because if your team controls the point, every second you can stall out the enemy team from flipping it over to their favor is an extra bit of capture percentage that you will get for your team. The best way to exploit this mechanic is that you can alternate having just one player on your team touch the point at any given time, and they can either die on point or run away when they're about to die and tag in the next player, letting them take over stalling duty while they get healed up and then come back later. If you chain who stalls an objective one after the other, you can actually buy a ridiculous amount of time, which might well be the difference between winning or losing a game. Our next term to define is fairly simple. It's called zoning. Zoning is when an action by a player or team denies the enemy team certain areas of the map, effectively zoning them out of certain territory. A good example of this is Cassidy's Deadeye ultimate. When he uses this ultimate, he has the opportunity to instantly kill anyone who is in his sightlines for too long. Early on in the life of Overwatch, this was considered a deadly ultimate, but now players have gotten a lot better and they generally know just to duck out of the sightline of the Cassidy, thereby denying him the chance to kill anyone. So nowadays, Deadeye is actually often used as a zoning ultimate, because what you can do is force the enemy out of certain areas and into other spots where they're either doing nothing or where you can pounce on them for yourself. Here's a good example from my stream where Faria was playing the event I mentioned earlier, the Rank Gauntlet. A Diva Bomb is thrown out to zone Faria out of a certain area, forcing her to position to the side to avoid dying to it. I'm calling this a zoning ultimate because it's not really trying to get the kill for itself, it's setting up for what's about to come next, which is that there's a Cassidy waiting with a high noon here to pincer her from the other angle, making it so that she effectively has no safe place to be. So zoning can be powerful just to buy your team a bit of breathing room, but also as a 1-2 punch that allows your team to secure certain kills. Our next term is also relatively simple, but incredibly important in Overwatch: target focus. If someone calls to target focus in a game of Overwatch, it simply means that you should all concentrate your damage on one target. If all 5 members of the team are shooting different targets, then you'll find that things die very slowly. But if everyone focuses on one target, then that is exponentially better, because you will kill that one target very fast, then the next, and then the next one, and so on, allowing the lethality to ramp up and snowball. So often, if you feel like your team is not doing enough damage, it might just be that their damage is going on too many different targets instead. Our next concept is one that is not so simple, and often not apparent to players: playing slow. So let's take a look at an example to show you what it means. Let's look carefully at this situation. The clock has just hit overtime, and the red team has just lost 2 players, as we can see in the kill feed. They are now at a severe disadvantage. However, all 3 of the remaining characters, the Winston, Genji, and the Ana, are approaching their ultimates. Moreover, the longer they can stall this fight out, the closer they get to their teammates respawning and rejoining him in the fight, with their spawn room not being too far away. If the red team played perhaps normally, they might take this fight. The Winston would go in aggressively, as would the Genji, and they would both presumably die before their ultimates or teammates could come back. Instead, they can do what's called playing slow, which is to basically just focus on surviving and using as few resources as possible to do so. It's effectively a form of buying time where you don't commit to the fight until the thing you're waiting for is ready. Then when their ultimates come online, that's when they can press the go button and speed up the tempo of their attack, committing where they have an advantage they can leverage. Nanoblade and Primal Rage, for example. Recognizing what situation the fight is in and then adapting your playstyle is very important in Overwatch, so make sure you and your teammates play slow when you need to wait just a few seconds for a more opportune moment to fight. Next up is spawn camping. This is another term that the name kind of gives away what's happening, but still, let's clarify. Sometimes when you win a fight in Overwatch close to the opponent's spawn, you may well want to just go all the way in and wait for them right outside their spawn to take the next fight there. This is what's called spawn camping. The reason you might want to do this is A, spawn rooms usually have very narrow pathways that the team must come through, which make them great choke points to block opponents in. And B, fighting here means that the enemy team doesn't get to fight at the objective, so you're usually winning the objective war by default. You can also spawn camp as an individual, where you target a specific opponent who you think is easy to one-on-one, and then wait for them outside of spawn after they've died to pick them off easily on their way back. Then you can rejoin your team after having got that kill, making a 4v5 fight in your favor. On to our second last term, and this is crowd control, often abbreviated simply to CC. Crowd control refers to abilities that deny you access to movement or control of your character. The term comes from MMORPG games like World of Warcraft, where crowd control abilities were necessary to literally control crowds of opponents. you would disable multiple enemies or just occupy them and hold their space so that they aren't hitting the important targets that you're trying to protect who output the real damage. Crowd control is just things like sleep dart, hack, freeze, or a stun like earth shatter, which, like I said, stop you properly controlling your character for a while. Sometimes these are the only answer to a particularly strong character or a strong ultimate, but they are very frustrating to go up against. So thankfully, the devs at Blizzard made a concerted effort to reduce crowd control when they switched over from Overwatch 1 to Overwatch 2. But there's still plenty of times where you will get spammed down with CCs and lose your mind. Our final term is less about tactics and more just about clarity, main support and flex support. In a proper team Overwatch, you will usually have one player designated as a main and one player as a flex support. These terms go all the way back to the early days of Overwatch when Lucio was picked literally all the time in every composition. Back then, you would always need a Lucio player, and this would be your main support. Depending on composition, situations, and balance changes, you would then have a second player who would flexibly pick whatever the other support that is needed in that situation, and they would be the flex support. Nowadays, the term is a bit more complicated and fluid, but generally these are the main support characters: Mercy, Brigitte, and Lucio. These are the anchors of the team and often bear certain external responsibilities such as shot calling or ultimate tracking. Shot calling being the primary communicator who decides what the team does, and ultimate tracking simply meaning keeping a rough track of what ultimates the enemy team may have coming up. The flex supports are Zen, Ana, Bap, and Moira. You can also add Kiriko to this list. It can be helpful to know these terms because they get used a lot, but they're not set in stone because you will often have teams which have 2 flex supports or 2 main supports. So yeah, do what you will with that term. And on that underwhelming note, we draw an end to the first episode of the Overwatch Dictionary. There are still quite a few terms that we have left to define, but those will be split up into different categories in different episodes. I hope you found this video useful, and if you have, then please do consider liking, subscribing, and checking out those other channels I told you about, the Group Up podcast, the B-Side channel, where you'll see all the content from my live stream, which is twitch.tv/SVB_, where, like I said, I stream 5 days a week. If you don't like the sounds of any of those things, then please do consider supporting me directly through my Patreon. And I want to give a huge shout out to my current patrons who do the awesome job of supporting me and without whom I could not make the videos I continue to make. Also, do come check out my Discord server where you can not only keep up with all SCV related news, but also play in pugs and fun community events like the Overfest that we host, which have holiday themed mini contests like art competitions and writing competitions, and sometimes just goofy mini games for you to play. All the links I've mentioned are in the video description, but that's it from me. I'll be back before you know it with another video and another episode of the Overwatch Dictionary when we'll be defining more things in this beautiful game of ours. See you guys soon.